What's up, everybody? Welcome to this bonus episode of Comic Book Nation, the only show that does it all for geek culture and the official podcast of Comicbook.com. Today, I am your host, Kofi Outlaw, and I am joined by my co-host, Connor Casey, and one of our Comicbook.com comic book slash all-around culture experts, Mr. Russ Burlingame is with us. And we needed to pull in Russ because, as you can see, he is one of our top experts on all things DC Comics. This man was single-handedly just holding together our Arrowverse coverage for many, many years. And so it's only appropriate that we bring him on to join us for the discussion of the day. Our bonus round topic today is the casting of the DCU Supergirl. So this has been a major kind of Hollywood headline-making Hollywood casting that was taking place. We got a short list a couple weeks ago. That short list consisted of House of the Dragon star Milly Alcock, Meg Donnelly, who also voices Supergirl in a lot of the current DC animated projects, and I can't believe the star of Coda, and I can't believe Amelia Jones, the star of Coda, who these were the final three ladies in contention. We got word yesterday it's going to be House of the Dragons, Milly Alcock. So I've got to kind of recuse myself from this first question because I wrote a whole comic book article arguing for why Amelia Jones would be the best choice. So I kind of put myself out there, and obviously I didn't get my choice. I was never mad at any of these choices, but obviously for me, I had a lot of reasonings for this other person. So I'm curious, Connor and Russ, how did you guys feel about learning that we're not only getting Milly Alcock as Supergirl, but Milly Alcock is Supergirl in what will eventually be, we'll talk about this, her solo project as complicated and important as Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow.
I was excited about the idea of any of these three women, and so it's kind of a cop-out answer, but like it's having an answer and having a sense of where we're going to go forward is nice. The only thing that is kind of a bummer is that it obviously would have been nice to have Donnelly's continuity. She literally is voicing it in Crisis right now, and you can go from the old animated universe to the new live action one. But that's microscopic level nerd stuff.
Yeah, I mean, there were so many good reasons for all three. Obviously, Milly Alcock is super red hot after her time on House of the Dragon. She was, a blonde, blue-eyed lady, visually one of the most easy actresses to imagine for the average person to imagine in that role. Plus, they saw her play this very complicated princess character in House of the Dragon. Again, these are easy leaps of logic for any would-be internet casting director. That's not a real casting director, by the way, guys. That's just people on the internet, but very recognizable. Meg Donnelly, like you said, she's going deep into Supergirl, mentality right now to play Kara, who's a very pivotal character in this Crisis animated trilogy. So she's doing the work right now. And then you have Amelia Jones, who I wrote about, who has put together this like insane career and has the most extensive kind of filmography and most kind of acclaimed filmography. She's going from like Oscar projects to genre projects to just kind of in nailing it each time. So they were all three very strong candidates. Connor, you were part of. I know Russ told us before the show he didn't watch House of the Dragon, but Connor, we consigned you. You were roped in with the rest of us on Comic Book Nation into doing some very close House of the Dragon recaps. So, how do you feel about this one?
So of the three, she was the one I was most excited about. Cope, you made some great arguments for the other two. My thing with Millie was that it made the most sense business-wise. She has the stardom coming off of House of the Dragon, but it's not like these projects would directly interfere with that because she's already off the show. They already aged her up to the new actress. This one made sense. She's 23 years old. She's got a bit of heat behind her right now, coming off of her last project. And it's not like she had 5 more film and television projects lined up coming out of House of the Dragon. She's a free agent, effectively. So they're able to lock her in. You've announced it early enough to where she can be on set for Superman Legacy, pop up in that. She'll do Woman of Tomorrow. And then, she's young enough to where 10 years from now, she's still a big player in this. So I got no complaints with this one.
Yeah. Milly Alcock is currently 23. She's 5'5", which is, that's pretty good. She's not the tiniest of ladies. She's kind of in the middle. And like you said, yeah, I could see her being freed up right now, being a franchise player for a long time to come, and obviously has kind of the appearance and looks. We know that we're long past hating on a British super person because Henry Cavill, he cracked that ceiling and got us over, and so I'm not hung up on anything there. Like, yeah, I mean, I want to make this more controversial than it is just because DC, like DC
Right.
castings. But this one, we were always kind of safe no matter where this landed. So even though I wanted Emilia Jones and I thought she would be kind of good for like the dramatic depth of what goes on, I don't think Milly Alcock is at all incapable of navigating that. If you can navigate the family dynamics of House of the Dragon, you can do anything. So, yeah. All right. So we're good with this one. We're good with the casting. Let's talk about kind of what's happened since. So ever since the casting came out, we've gotten reactions from 2 important people, DC Studios co-head James Gunn and Tom King, who wrote friend to our show and who wrote Supergirl, Woman of Tomorrow, and is involved in the movie, but not directly penning the script to the movie. Let's be clear about that. So let's go with what Gunn said. Gunn heard the reports and said, "This is accurate. Millie is a fantastically talented young actor, and I'm incredibly excited about her being a part of the DCU. Yes, I first became aware of her in House of the Dragon, but I was blown away by her varied auditions and screen tests for Supergirl. She embodies Kara as envisioned by Tom King, Bilquis, and Anna Noguera, who is the script writer for the film, Anna." So, I mean, that tells us just a tiny bit. It tells us that, like, Milly Alcock didn't just walk in here and, like, rest on her laurels, that they really did, as the short list and the reports kind of suggested, they put her through the test. Like, she actually went in there multiple times, did the screen test, did the auditions, and earned that spot. So she's bringing something to the table right there, right? So
I think the very hands-on casting process that Gunn has had, combined with his, whether or not you are the biggest James Gunn fan in the world, I think one of the strongest things in his movies is casting. Dude does not miss. Mm-hmm. And so to me, like, his very hands-on approach and his track record of success kind of tells you that, like, okay, we're in good hands going into this. The only thing that was really interesting about all 3 of the finalists to me is that they felt really safe. And so to a big extent do Superman and Lois in this movie. It makes me feel like after all of the controversy and all of the everything of the last 10 years, Gunn is trying to get his universe off on, like, the easiest, most straightforward foot he can.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Connor Cook.
No, Russ, you nail it on the head as far as Gunn doesn't miss with casting. This is a guy that looked at Dave Bautista, who was getting small bit parts in action movies, and said, "I'm going to make you the comedic backbone of the Guardians trilogy." and it works. This guy took Pete Davidson and said, I'm gonna put you in a Suicide Squad movie, and everyone's like, what are you doing? And the punchline worked. Like, this guy does not miss when it comes to casting. So with this, I'm fine. The real question I've got for you two is, having not read Woman of Tomorrow, the Tom King run, does she fit into what Tom was trying to do with her character in that particular story?
As I wrote in my article about Amelia Jones, I was saying the thing, because the first part I said was just presenting who is Supergirl in Woman of Tomorrow. And the answer is she's everything. That's kind of the point of Woman of Tomorrow. It's almost told in anthology chapters, and each one deals with some other aspect of Kara and her personality, her psychology, her kind of emotional story. And so it's literally like, it's everything. That's the point of the story. She's fierce and violent and angry and compassionate and vulnerable, and never gives up, and kind of invulnerable in the way of a spiritual fortitude, and never giving up, never gets depressed, but never suffers injustice and just lets it go or turns a blind eye to it. Like, it's everything. So you've really got to be able to convey that level of complexity to a female character, and one who also has superpowers on top of that, because it's a big part of the story. Also, superpowers doesn't mean the same thing for Supergirl that it does for Superman, and kind of what you do with that power isn't the same. And so, yeah, it's complex, and that's what makes it wonderful. It's more complexity than arguably many creators have ever given to Kara in her story, and kind of mapping her psychology based on the actions, or based on the kind of context of her lore, and what that feels like for her, and like all of that stuff. So yeah, you need somebody who can go all around the bend with it. And if Milly Alcock went in there and just really showed that off, it means that, like, yeah, she probably just nailed all those things. So, good on her. I mean, that's hearing she auditioned and did all that is probably the most validating thing for me about whomever got the job. Like, it's not an easy audition, I would imagine.
I think, to your point, the fact that the word gun used was varied speaks volumes. Like, I adored Melissa Benoist's take on Kara, but it was very much a consistent take. Like, they didn't ask her to go outside of her comfort zone all that often. She basically just nailed that tone. Whereas Woman of Tomorrow is asking you to be all things to all people. And it's almost like the superhero version of the Barbie monologue, which is a great thing for us three men to be breaking down.
We got it. We'll tell them what's what. No.
But so to me, I think that word varied was a very specific choice on Gunn's part, to kind of acknowledge that this wasn't just like looking at the fact that she's a blonde warrior woman and being like, okay, we're good. That he asked her to do a bunch of stuff, and that she was able to kind of turn out more than just one skill set in the additions.
Yeah, I know that the biggest thing, and I lived, and I know, Russ, you were probably there too. We were in the 2010s during the DCEU casting process, which was a lot more volatile, when Gal Gadot got cast. And if you were there and you were doing this job and reporting and in the Twitterverse, you remember the vitriol that came with that casting. Namely, every bro out here somehow thinks they're a female physique expert when a lady gets cast in a superhero role. But so I know that while people will be kind of respectful of Milly Alcock as a performer and the looks, I wonder, if we're going to see the same thing about the physique. Have we already started to see that about she's got to hit the gym type stuff out there? Is that going on? I've been scared to look. Did anybody?
I haven't seen any of it, but it's not like she needs to be like Elizabeth Debicki in terms of like height. Like, Supergirl is never, portrayed as this towering figure. So I don't think there's much of an argument to be made, even if the creeps want to.
I think Gal probably helped that conversation a lot, because even though there are still people who have that take, it's like 5% of what it was when she got cast. And her absolutely killing that role allowed the kind of more nuanced conversation of, people with superpowers don't necessarily have to spend their entire life at the gym and have to look like lumberjacks, because like their powers are doing a lot of that work for them.
Yeah.
And also it helps that Millie looks very much like the character as presented in this one specific story that is the basis for her film.
Yeah. Agreed. Yeah, I haven't heard of this much, but I think you're right. Like, I think a lot of amateur casting trainers / trainers, had to STF you when Gal got on screen, and you were like, oh no, yeah, no. Like, the casting director knew. Like, Zack Snyder knew, Patty Jenkins knew, like those people knew. Like, we were just looking at photos and Fast and the Furious and guessing. But yeah, which was always absurd, because I just remember writing it one time. I'm like, this lady's job when she wasn't doing this was like training Israeli soldiers.
Yeah.
Like, she was the trainer for Israeli soldiers. And we're like, I don't know if you could be Wonder Woman. It's like, bro, calm down.
I just remember the argument being for Gina Carano, and now I just think that is such a massively dodged bullet.
Or what's Megan? I forget that actress's name, but like, she was almost Megan Gale or something. She was almost it in Justice League.
Yeah.
They did not let go of that.
There's a handful of those actors who every single time there's a superhero role, it's like, oh, well, let's just hire Alexandra Daddario. And it's like, she's good, and she does look like a superhero in the sense that she's like a conventionally attractive white girl. But like, the immediate knee-jerk instinct to just be like, hey, let's cast that person as soon as a role opens up tells you that like there's not a lot of deep thinking going on in a lot of these conversations.
No, although I would still take her as Zatanna. I think she'd be a great Zatanna.
No,
I mean, she's
terrific. I'm not knocking her in any way. I'm just saying, like, the
is there
fact
a Zatanna?
that every role.
I'm just messing around. Yeah. So, all right. I mean, this is strangely, because we're so positive, it's just hard to get any juice out of that. Tom King wrote, she's Supergirl and she doesn't give a blank about slings and arrows. Perfect casting. Couldn't be more excited to see Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow, the world that Bilquis built, brought to life by this incredible actor. Insanity. It started so small. So Tom King is all in, and if he's on board, I got no reason not to be. All right, let's move on to our second topic real quick. We got some new movie details. It wasn't just that we got the Supergirl casting. Like, we got Supergirl casting and then follow-up reporting that told us really where this film sits. And it seems to be sitting at like the top of the priority list over there at DC Studios. So just to catch everybody up, what we've heard so far, along with Milly Alcock's casting, is that this movie could ramp up to start production as early as fall 2024, putting it on track to possibly have a late 2025 or into early 2026 release, which would essentially put it right on kind of the heels of Superman Legacy. We know, we already went over, there's a writer, and we heard that, we might not have to wait for Women of Tomorrow to start seeing Milly Alcock show up on screen. It's been said that Supergirl will be appearing in, and it's quoted and specifically noted that it will be multiple DCU projects before we get to our official Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow film. Sorry, my brain froze. So, what do you guys think about that? Oh, before we get into all that, I missed the topic. I wanted to say that I want to be really super duper interested to know if she also did auditions alongside David Corn Sweat, and if they had them have any interplay there. Because while it's not a huge deal breaker, obviously, but the interplay that people are going to want to see, maybe at first, is somewhere along the line is Supergirl and Superman, right?
Yeah.
And
there were trade reports, I think, last week that the final stage with these three women was involved coming down to the Legacy set and reading with Superman and Lois. I don't know. I don't remember what trade I saw that in, and so take it with a grain of salt. But I assume that's probably accurate because they haven't cast anybody else for Woman of Tomorrow yet, and so it just tracks.
Yeah. Yep. So, all right. I'm gonna be interested to see how that went. And I mean, she like again, I would think that was the other thing about Milly Alcock is she was just so electric on screen and going against some really talented performers, right? Like if you could steal scenes from Matt Smith, like that one episode of House of the Dragon we don't want to think about. But like that's no small achievement for your charisma and chemistry abilities as an actress. So I really want to see what kind of dynamic Gunn has created for this version of Kara and Clark and Lois too, and anybody else who's in the vicinity. But I'm really kind of interested. Like I would like to see what Jimmy Olsen meets Supergirl. Like these versions of these characters would be kind of hilarious, right?
Jimmy was the only person from the Reeve movies who carried over into the Supergirl movie in '84.
Wow. See, this is why we have you, Russ. You were like, "What? When are you bringing me on?" I was like, "I need your knowledge of all this stuff."
And they were reading Incredible Hulk comics, so it was a weird Marvel crossover.
Man, we do not write enough about this stuff on Comic Book. This is what we should be doing with our time. All right. So back to the reports. What do you guys think about how this positions Supergirl in this new franchise, and where do you predict we see her prior to this movie? And let's just say this movie comes out in 2026. Let's push it to the furthest expected point. Where do you think we see her show up?
I have to imagine it's a cameo. This movie's busy. Like there's a lot of characters from a lot of different parts of DC all popping up into this at once. And on top of that, you've got to nail the Superman and Lois dynamic and whatever his first villain winds up being. I don't even know if do we have that confirmed yet, Russ?
I think the Engineer is the villain as far as the discussions that we've heard so far. If I had to guess, we're going to see some other person. Rumors early on where the Brainiac will have a role.
You've got her. You've got whatever the Authority winds up being and how it plays into that movie. You've got Lex. Like this movie, there's a lot here. So it could be a video phone call, and she's like, "Hey, I'm going off into space. I got to go do something," and that'd be it.
I will say, I worry a little bit about the number of characters involved, but I did about 6 months ago to go out to New Jersey for a script reading of Kevin Smith's Superman Lives, where he and a bunch of actors read through the script. And one thing that I noticed in that movie, because that movie had Batman and the Suicide Squad and a bunch of stuff in it, but it was just the Death and Return of Superman movie. I was surprised how intuitively the characters were introduced, how easy it was to just kind of like see them, enjoy them, and forget them. So I think if you don't get too hung up on the mythology of it all, which I think was the big problem with BVS, was just like things happening for the sake of them happening. I think that there is a fairly easy way to like put all this stuff in here and not feel like you're too overloaded and not feel bloated. The big question that I had kept from that report that Kofi read was the word multiple is interesting, because to me, the only things that we know for sure are coming before Supergirl are Legacy and Creature Commandos, and possibly either Waller or Peacemaker, but I feel like probably not both.
I'm wondering about the connection of both. There's a lot of things I'm wondering here, but yeah, go ahead.
All I was saying was the word multiple is therefore interesting because like multiple suggests more than two, which means more than two of those things have to exist first.
I'm still on the train that the Authority is secretly a Superman sequel, and who better to call in backup than your cousin?
Yeah,
I also have theories. I have a big theory that I've always been cooking on, that because they're doing Brave and the Bold, and this movie is called Superman Legacy, I have this kind of wild theory that they've said the stuff about All-Star Superman, which is basically telling stories about Superman as a myth. I feel like Superman Legacy is going to be more of looking kind of back. I think it involves more about John than we think, and that like a lot of this framework is kind of teaching John about who his dad is. And I know that Gunn is doing this with deep personal connections to his late father. So like I feel like that's secretly what this movie kind of is John's coming out story, and not the sexual sense, but in him figuring out now, oh crap, I have this huge responsibility. How do I deal with that? What is my responsibility to the world? These things like a kid today might be freaking out about and anxious about. And it's his parents kind of, or Lois, who was, first and foremost, one kick-ass storyteller, sitting him down and being like, here's who your dad is and why he is and how he is and what it does for people, world, even the villains. And, John's got to do this in a context where people like the engineer and the authority are out here and are more attractive to a younger generation who thinks, oh, my dad's just some old fuddy-duddy. And kind of getting that kind of opens up the room for you to do all that heartfelt core Superman stuff, a father-son story on multiple levels, Lois as the stuff we loved from Superman and Lois that gives you the modern depiction of who these people are as parents, all that stuff. So I think it's more about that than Gunn lets on, because he just doesn't want people to be out here like, no, you can't have John, and John must be this, or there must be two of them, like all that stuff. But I think when we're going to be getting this, it's like Russ said, it'll be the stories will be starting from a point when things are established, but the stories are about how Superman similarly had to go through those same questions and figure it out. So you get classic Superman, modern Superman, and because we're in there, it's essentially the present action is in the modern times. Yeah, you have an entire world. It's like you walk by and Lois can call up and be like, Kara, tell him this story of blah, blah, blah. And Kara flies and she's just like, oh my God. Yeah, that one time we were on Alpha Centauri, blah, 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 blah. And, Clark had to do X, Y, Z, and you can do it that way, right? And that's the kind of thing Gunn loves to do. He loves those kind of narratives within narratives, stop, and like jokingly have a flashback story that gets interrupted when an eccentric character is just like, something happens again. So that's been my theory. I have no proof for that. I'm just a wild guy who spends too much time on the internet, but yeah, Damon in the comments this one time on World. Yeah.
Yes.
Like
exactly.
Exactly.
There's two things that would be really interesting about that if that were the case, which you aren't the first person I've heard speculate that's why Legacy is the title, is that John is heavily involved. The first thing is that Dan Jurgens and Lee Weeks' Superman, Lois, and Clark from about 5 years ago is a really great, beautiful story, but it's structured very much like that because Superman at that time was like incognito, and so he had single issue adventures that culminated with John finding out like, holy cow, I have powers and my dad's Superman. So like that, if that's the case, that miniseries could be very much a blueprint for how to do it right. But the other interesting thing about what you're talking about the idea of almost serializing the movie as a way of explaining all these characters being there, is that the Reeve movies they all had those montages. Like I heard somebody, I think it was Mike Bailey from Crisis to Crisis, call it the Super Feats montages, where you see him do like a bunch of cool, fun stuff in the space of like 2 to 3 minutes. The closest thing we got in Man of Steel was the flying scene. But something like that kind of writ large could take up pretty much a whole movie if it was to happen the way you're describing.
Yeah, people in the comments said that Marcos Mora, shout out to everybody in the southern part of the world who loves this show. We love you guys, especially Brazil. Brazil's been turning up lately for this show, so shout out to everybody. But said that Gunn said there isn't flashbacks. Yeah, filmmakers say a lot of things, and they're very particular about semantics. So, like, yeah, we might not get flashbacks, but stories is something we could easily get, right? Like, I don't think it would be cheesy because flashback is kind of a cheesy thing in a thing, but I think it's different when you're kind of framing a movie as a set of stories, right? Those aren't flashbacks. It's almost like little anthology vignettes. Which,
at minimum, I do think starting this as not an origin story, but as a story where Superman is established, which is the thing they keep saying is that he's established. And I think that doing that is going to almost necessitate an exploration of what Superman means to the world, because Superman isn't just another hero. He's the hero. And so if you're exploring a version where it's not like, oh my God, that dude's flying, then you've got to explore a version where you explain how Superman is meaningful in the context of this new universe.
And I mean, Chris Nolan will tell you, you don't have to have flashbacks if the story is nonlinear.
Yeah,
exactly. So there's a lot of ways around that, but yeah, I think that's the point, as Russ kind of nails it on the head. And I think that's why the Engineer and the Authority were early things. It's a way, it's basically Kingdom Come, the soft modern version, right? If you've never read Kingdom Come or Woman of Tomorrow, go read both those books. Those go get those trades. You're really safe with them. Then you want them in your collection. But Kingdom Come was the 90s version of DC's millennial existential crisis.
It was the answer to
will
Watchmen.
classic heroes, will the classic heroes still matter in a new age? And you know, that whole story. And where do the young generation take their legacy from? And who do they take it from? So I feel like this could be a lot of that same ideas at play.
I think even more on the nose is What's So Funny About Truth, Justice, and the American Way, which is a standalone issue of Action Comics written by Joe Kelly from Man of Action, but which got adapted into the animated movie Superman versus the Elite.
Mm-hmm.
And when they were first introduced, the Elite was literally like stand-ins for the Authority. So with no established mythology for the Authority, you could bring them in to just do the Elite's job.
Oh, we've said Manchester Black is getting cast in this movie since the beginning.
You have no idea how vindicated I feel, because when they announced the DCU lineup, I said, the Authority is just Superman versus the Elite. And everyone went, ooh, now the expert's saying it's happening.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying it's happening, but it certainly makes sense. And it's fun to speculate about that kind. And I mean, if they're doing their jobs right, all of our speculations will be wrong, because we shouldn't be able to write their movie for them.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think, like, looking at how closely they're hewing to the comics in certain things, like adapting an entire Supergirl movie straight from one miniseries, you can probably make some educated guesses based on things like that.
Yeah. We got to close out, but I think Gunn realizes the difference between DC and Marvel, which is Marvel has great characters to mine because they're all so messed up and conflicted, and they're not godly. They're human. They're flawed. So that makes for great like TV and cinema. DC has a lot of great stories and always has like complete story arcs that stand the test of time and are just reinforcing themes and ideas that just were really well done. And that's Woman of Tomorrow. And so like, yeah, I think Superman versus the Elite and everything in there is going to be also at the center of this. Is like, why does this old-fashioned hero need to be not just an example to the world, but to other heroes versus these other people who have other ideas? And how does Superman not beat these people down physically, but spiritually get them to kind of come around is the power he has. So yeah, I'm really interested to see, but I think we are getting a Manchester Black casting. I feel like I don't want to write a movie for Gunn, but he knows the stories that work. And I can't see James. I will be disappointed if James Gunn, of all people, doesn't take Manchester Black out of the toy box and be like, I'm playing with this, because those two just seem destined to be linked in some form or fashion. So, all right. Anybody got any kind of parting thoughts? This has been a fun discussion. I could geek out with you guys all day on just the potential things that are going to happen in the DCU. Russ, do you have any parting thoughts?
My biggest thing is that I think this revelation that Supergirl is going into development essentially back to back with Superman is a really good sign for something that Gunn needs to do, which is that Gunn needs to be decisive and have a roadmap. A big problem that DC has had over the last 5 years is that post Justice League, every time like a door slammed too loudly, everybody at Warner Brothers threw all the cards up in the air and said, let's start over again. The idea that they're like, okay, our second movie is going to be essentially a spinoff of our first movie, means that they are going to stand by Superman Legacy, and they're not going to immediately start trying to backtrack if the movie doesn't make $1 billion.
Yeah, that's important. Like, I hope somebody had the kind of sobering conversations to make everybody finally realize, like, if we got to go backward. If we get over $500 million, okay. Do not spend accordingly. But if we can get over $500 million, yay. Let's just put that as the new benchmark until this thing ramps back up again. So,
yeah, I will say the idea that was floated like 5-10 years ago of we're going to make a Justice League movie for $150 million, and then next we'll do some other weird little movie for $50 million that doesn't have to be a $1 billion movie to succeed. That was like a thing that came up, and the idea was we'll do Doom Patrol and Suicide Squad and Booster Gold and all this on the cheap, and we'll be able to make a $200 million make $200 million from a movie and turn a profit. And that evaporated immediately because they did Suicide Squad and they wanted Will Smith, and it was like, oh well, this is a real movie now. I do think cost management is going to be huge in the DC universe, not just because I think Gunn is really good at bringing in movies on time and under budget, but also because movies aren't making $1 billion anymore. You can't go in saying we're going to spend Flash money and just assume it'll be okay.
Especially for Supergirl. Like, no offense to Supergirl, but like, just because you saw Barbie doesn't mean like you're going to necessarily pull the same thing unless you earn it. So you gotta still earn it, and you got to invest like you're launching an IP, not trying to put out a super popular IP movie character already. I mean, you have that with Superman, you have that with Batman, but you got to go in hungry. So I'm with you on that. And people are final thought from me in the comments. People are asking about director. I think that they should learn from Marvel Studios in late phase 2, phase 3 that got us Gunn. In TV and indie movies right now, ladies have been flooding. If you have not paid attention to the credits of your television shows lately, ladies have been flooding the zone in the last few years as directors, cinematographers, stuff like that. Find a talent that's been working on that screen and bubbling, just waiting, and Russo brothers that thing. Tap her, be like, all right, here we go. You know, Gunn's there. He knows indie. He knows blockbuster. Like, he can be a good guiding hand, and let that lady cook. So go into the TV pool. It is overflowing with talent right now, and female talent. So just, check that out. That's my recommendation. All right. We ready to do plugs? This is Comic Book Nation. We are the only show that does it all for geek culture. This has been our bonus episode just talking about Supergirl. But guys, we do so much more every week. Every Tuesday night, we have had Comic Book Nation's Riptide Radio, which is a Percy Jackson and the Olympians after show. The finale is this week. Be sure to check it out. And if you are waiting and coming to the table late and you're going to be binging Percy Jackson, be sure to go on the Comic Book Nation YouTube page and rewatch all of the recap shows where Liam Crowley sits down with not just himself and our talented experts, but the entire cast and crew of Percy Jackson has been rolling through this, and they have big things ready for the finale. Every Wednesday, we have Matthew Aguilar doing the pull list, where we talk about the biggest comics of the week, continuing storylines, new launches, the whole 9 yards, and we recommend a bunch for you guys. Russ, we got to get you on that soon. We also have this week, we're going to be working with gaming on Suicide Squad, Kill the Justice League. DC is doing big things on the gaming front, and this is going to be something worth talking about, whether it crashes and burns or flies high. So we will be discussing that. And every Friday is the regular live show, Comic Book Nation, where we literally go all over geek culture. In one episode, we can be doing TV, movies, Marvel, DC, Star Trek, Star Wars, wrestling, food, games, tabletops. It's everything. So we will be there. Subscribe on your podcast platform. Subscribe on our YouTube page, and we will see you out there. Check out ComicBook.com DC, because we will all also be writing about Supergirl and much more in the coming days. Thank you for joining us. We are Comic Book Nation, and we'll see you guys out there. Peace.
Later.